Hey, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. My name is John. This is Havoc Maker Studio, and we're going to dive right into the Runes of Symbaroum 5e Player's Guide review. It is currently on pre-order between now and June 7th of 2022. If you pre-order now, we'll cover that a little bit at the end. If you pre-order now, depending on what size of bundle that you go for, or individual books, you can get the PDFs for free. I guess I already just now talked about it. You can get the PDFs now, so you can start reading, getting used to this new setting, some of the newer rules that are really amazing, and prepping your players for the inevitable release of the physical copies of this book. Unless you've already got it through last year's amazing successful Kickstarter, or you actually received it from that Kickstarter. Yeah. So, anyways, let's just get right into this book. Let's not mess around too much. So, right now, this player's guide is pretty much like a standard Dungeons and Dragons 5e player's guide with a couple extra features. So, one big feature you will see, that's if you're used to non-official Dungeons and Dragons settings from Wizards of the Coast, you'll see that these type of books will not have the core mechanics in it because of the licensing. You have to include a reference saying that you have to have the Wizards of the Coast Dungeons and Dragons 5e Player's Handbook to be able to use this product, which is totally cool. That helps get them to get money and allow other people to use that as a resource. So it's all cool. Most people already have a player's handbook, or you could find them at your local game store, or probably at you can go to eBay if you want to probably find cheaper or half price books. There's always somebody trying to get rid of this stuff, or somebody bought too many books, or maybe there's a unfortunate divorce going on, and the wife or the husband are trying to get rid of the other's books. So just pay attention to that if you don't already have one. Now, this setting, Symbaroum, we're just going to go with Symbaroum for the duration of this video. Symbaroum is a very dark, gritty setting. And it's really, I would say it's a really grounded setting. Now, the 5e is slightly different because the 5e rule set is does a little bit more hand holding than the original core set. But the creators of Symbaroum have done what they can to make it still that challenging, taking the setting itself, which is just as deadly and dangerous as any D&D monster, and weaving it into the 5e system. Now, there's still going to be some hand holding. You've heard me talk about it before with the 5e rule set, how the classes work. It's really kind of like, I'm not going to say easy mode. I'm going to say somewhere in between easy and normal mode, like in a video game reference. That's 5e. Now, Symbaroum is hard mode, maybe even insanity mode, depending. So that's just kind of gives you an idea of where we're at with this 5e conversion. Now, the biggest selling point for Symbaroum, and I'm going to do a lore video on this later, is the setting. The setting itself is what is going to draw you in. And the fact that they've done a 5e conversion for this absolutely amazing setting and gorgeous artwork is actually phenomenal. I really enjoy it. I prefer the core rules over the 5e, but that's just because the core rules are not very forgiving. They're really grim. So we got a great in-depth look at the setting, the background, the locations, the people. There's also, when we look at the other books, the Game Master's Guide and the Bestiary, we'll see that there's more information for the setting in there as well. So if you get all three books, you really get a grasp of what Symbaroum is about. And we're going to delve a little bit into that today. So we got a whole bunch of new rules We're not going to cover all the new rules, but I would say that they're to get a not only get a good feeling for what the setting is about. The creators over there at Free League Publishing have done a good job of enhancing the 5e rules with breaking down the role of the players, stuff like traveling and resting to make it a little bit more realistic. Social challenges. We're going to take a quick peek at social challenges, which, Wizard of the Coast normally doesn't hint on. It's really just, hey, roll some charisma checks and voila, you're there. And they leave that up to the GM or the DM, which is, that's how you role play, of course, right? But they expand upon that and turn those from just being a normal chit chat encounter to an actual challenge. And then there's rewards for those challenges, just like fighting a monster. So those players that you have that are actually role playing, not rolling dice, well, they're rolling dice, but they're actually role playing, interacting, and being in character, have a better opportunity, better challenges, so they can stretch their part of their gaming experience out a little bit more. Or those that prefer the dice rolling and the combat and the efficiency of their character stats and whatnot, they have their aspect that is, I would say, mostly getting taken care of most of the time. And now with the social challenges, it now gives those other players a much bigger, deeper connection to the game, to the group, and a role to play in that gaming session. So Corruption and Shadow is another thing that is pulled over from Symbaroum. Your shadow is kind of like your aura, where people with certain talents are able to perceive your aura, or an aura of like, say, magic items or creatures. Every living thing and magical thing has an aura of some sort, and that's called your shadow. And depending on the colors, you can gleam? No, that's gleaming the cube. Glean some details out about who the character is. So if I've got somebody who's radiating gold and silver, maybe they're a very devout, holy, pure individual, while somebody with dark browns and greens woven in and out of their shadow are a little bit more akin to a very primal, have a primal connection to, say, nature. Or if you got like reds and blacks woven in and out of your shadow, maybe you are a born bred killer. You are an assassin, maybe, or a murderer, that sort of thing, murder hoboing. And then there's the corruption that can be seen. That's like some dark purples and blacks and blues, kind of a bruised aura. That means that you've got some level of corruption. And that's where we come into. Now, the shadow, where that is a role-playing aspect of corruption and shadow. Corruption is a game mechanic, but also blends in with the role-playing. Now, the corruption, individuals can take so much corruption. And as the saying goes, power corrupts. You get corruption from casting spells. That is temporary corruption, but could lead to permanent corruption. You get corruption from attuning yourself to magic items. So having those amazing magic items might not be too great. And then you can get corruption from the environment, the flora, the fauna. So there's always a chance, most of the time, you'll get temporary corruption. But if your temporary corruption is so great that goes over your threshold, then you are likely going to get a roll in the marks of the corruption table. And if you get too much permanent corruption that exceeds your threshold, which is noticeably low in the beginning, but remember the whole hand holding with Dungeons and Dragons, it does get a little higher as you go. that once you overcome that threshold, congratulations, you are now a non-player character. Hand your sheet to your GM and make a new character. Congratulations, you are so thoroughly corrupted that you are no longer who you were. Does that make sense? I hope so. So corruption is bad. Magic is bad. So please be careful, everybody. So let's take a look at character origins. They use the term origins in place of character races, character species, character ancestry. That's such a weird one for me. But these are their character races. I'm going to hint on these just a little bit. We're not going to do a full deep dive. We'll get that with the lore video later on. So abducted humans. These are obviously humans that have been abducted as children or as infants by the elves, usually like spring or summer elves. And we'll talk about that in a second. And they're raised and trained and treated actually quite well by the elves, but they're to serve as basically in a military aspect or a militant aspect for them. As the elf numbers dwindle, they bring in abducted humans to fill their ranks. And so one thing I want to point out, well, we'll point out with the last character race, all these do have backgrounds of some sort, and you can also use the standard backgrounds in the player's handbook. We have the changelings. These are the individuals that are swapped out with the abducted humans. They do have the opportunity to get some shape-shifting ability later on. They have their own backgrounds. We have the dwarves, and these are not the dwarves that you are looking for. They are not the big bearded, big giant, silly Warhammer, double-headed axe, plate armor, beer guzzling, ale guzzling tinkers that you're used to in most fantasy settings. These are a very secretive race. They are actually hairless. They are artisans of some sort. They rock an absolute memory ability. They have a lot of connection to the earth, just like regular dwarves, but they are a quiet and I would say somber version of what dwarves you're used to. They got their own backgrounds. And then we got the elves. The elves, I'm going to give you a point of caution on when you're playing this game. Elves are kind of the big bad or one of the big adversaries. They do not like humanity. They hate humanity with a passion. Especially the younger the elf, the more anger that they have towards them. And elves go through a cycle in their lives. They go through spring, summer, autumn, and then finally winter. Winter being the oldest, most powerful versions, and that's mainly from surviving so long. Now, what you'll be playing here in this game are the summer elves. They have enough intellect, enough of a balance in their mental abilities and their emotional, social abilities and whatnot to be able to interact and kind of serve as ambassadors of sorts, or to aid humans in combating some threats from the forest of Davokor. So really cool stuff going on inside these, and I love the artwork. Absolute awesome artwork. All right, moving on, we got goblins. Goblins are one of the coolest races. They are not the green goblins that you're used to from D&D that attack in hordes. They are, you can ease up on the heavy goblin slayer breathing now, guys. It's okay. These are not the goblins you're looking for. I'm going to use that a lot today. But they are still kind of a social pariah, but they are everywhere. They're always underfoot. And but they're found in a lot of day-to-day life as day workers, not too much as military assets, but they do sometimes help fill the ranks when it comes to like your local town guard, or maybe into the various different like barbarian style armies. Now, here's an interesting aspect that's going to blow some people's minds. Goblins are the parents in a way of ogres and trolls. So when a goblin gets to a certain point in their life, they feel this draw to return to Davokor, the forest. And they usually will try to find some place underground and basically weave a cocoon of sorts around them. And those that survive will actually over time mature inside of that cocoon to become an ogre or a troll. But most tend to die. That's why we're not overrun with trolls and ogres. Now, trolls and ogres in this game are player origins or player races. But I'll leave the rest of that little tidbit for you guys to find out later. I don't want to ruin too much. So humans, we have essentially two types of humans, and it's really more about ethnicity than it is, or culture than it is like a variant type of human. So we have the Ambrians that have come from the south. They're kind of a mix of, I would say, kind of Italian-ish. There's some Italian hints in there, a little bit of French and English mixed in. Very well organized, a high society, high culture, maybe even a little bit of late Rome period. Then we have the Barbarians, which are what you would imagine for barbarians, like Vikings and the Celts, the Picts, the Danes, whatever you want to call, whichever type of Viking or barbarian style culture you could think of, that is a little bit more fitting, with the exception that these are more forest bound, land bound, than they are the coastal raiding culture that you're used to. They each have their own style of backgrounds that you can choose from. So really good there. They do a really good job of incorporating stuff from the original game. Now, ogres are, as I said before, a player option. Or not even, they're a standard origin or race. They are not the brightest in the bunch. Often when they're found, usually after their birth, they are almost childlike, even though they got these massive muscled bodies that could crush a skull with one hand. They are still kind of childlike, and they end up kind of maturing, but they develop kind of an attachment, like you would imagine, like a young duckling attaching itself and printing themselves on whoever finds them. So they tend to stick close to those people and put a lot of trust and faith in them. But they do have their own personalities. They're not slaves, though they can be slaves, I guess, but they're not enslaved. Some are more intelligent than others, but most are fairly simple, but immensely strong. Moving on, now we got the trolls. Now, the trolls, I'm going to stop here, or we'll still look at the next one, but the trolls are, like I said, come from goblins. These have a wonderful society, their own culture. They have a lot of artisans, artifact creators. They have their own type of archetype. I think they're called paths, where they're called troll singers. It's a type of magic that they can use. But these are not the, I just got my limb cut off, I'm going to reattach it, regenerating trolls that you're used to. These are civilized beings, are standing around 8 foot tall instead of the monstrous, horrible creatures you're used to in your standard D&D. One thing I want to point out is that each of these origins, when you look under their size, has a origin hit die. So depending on your class that you take later on, we're going to be delving into classes in just a second, you can choose to either go with your origin hit dice or your class hit dice for determining your hit points, hit dice for the rest of the game. Once that decision is made, that's where you're at. So some classes might have like a D6, but your troll gets a D8. You can sit there and just go with the origin option. That helps. That's a very good reflection of some of the other innate rules that they have in Symbaroum transferred over. The last race that we're going to talk about is the Undead. Now, the Undead, just like I was talking about with corruption before, the Undead is another thing that is kind of targeted by society. The Walking Dead is no bueno. They do not like dead things walking around. So you have to be careful. Just like kind of with the summer elves, you got to be careful. You are definitely not accepted in society unless, you know, your GM wants to allow it. But you are a major social pariah. I mean, you are seen as a detriment and a curse on society, and just having you around is not good. So expect to be chased by pitchforks and torches. So that takes care of the origins. We're going to burn through the various classes. These classes are different than the classes that are in the player's handbook. It is highly strongly, I'm basically telling you, use these classes only, but obviously you have your own option to not use it. But if you want to capture the feel of Symbaroum, stick with these classes. Do not deviate, because you are going to dilute the experience. So we have the captains. Now, you'll see some aspects of these classes will have some connection to original classes, but they also have a lot of their own feel to them. So a captain might have some little bits of, say, ranger and fighter in them, where, say, the warrior might have more barbarian than fighter. So at first level, everybody chooses an approach. An approach is basically your archetype. So for captains, we got merchant master, officers, outlaws, poet, warriors. And what those approaches do is just like your regular archetypes. They give you stuff, but instead of waiting until third level to get it, you get it automatically at first level. That's when you choose. So you get some extra abilities to start out. Hunters are the other one. They're very similar to, I would say, rangers. Slight abilities similar to druids in there, but mainly they are kind of like rangers of all sorts. Bounty hunters, the Iron Sworn, monster hunters, witch hunters. Mystics is the largest of the classes because there's a lot of mystical options. Now, mystics, since they do cast spells, they have a higher corruption threshold. So those of you that worried about casting magic because you love casting spells and such, and having all that magical power to unleash upon your enemies, you have a higher level of corruption. So not only do you have that, but you get favored spells. So you can see on their chart right there on the right side of the screen is that they have favored spells. That first number is your cantrips. The second number is the number of favored spells. And then that last column is the maximum spell level when you're choosing your spells. So your favorite spells, if it's a cantrip, cantrips cost 0 power or 0 corruption. You'll never take a point of corruption. Your favorite spells, you only take corruption equal to the level of the spell you cast. And that also applies to if you're casting a spell at a higher level, let's say a third level fireball, but you're casting at 5th level, or something along that lines, you will take the new value versus the rolling the dice and seeing how much corruption you're going to get. So we have artifact creators or crafters. That's mainly trolls, but not limited to trolls. We have self-taught mystics, sorcerers, staff mages, which are really cool, kind of a combat casting class. We have symbolists. Thurge. Now the Thurge is the closest thing to a priest that you're going to see. We have troll singers, as I mentioned before, and witches. And each of these, like I said before, have their own, well, these are approaches, but within those approaches, you might have additional paths to follow. So like the witch has the green, red, and white path that you can follow. And then we have the classic trained wizard. So we move into the Scoundrel, and you can kind of figure out this one. The Scoundrel is basically your thief, guys. But it also expands upon that, going to your explorers, former cultists, guild thieves, the sappers, for those that like the combat, and they do cover mass combat in this game. We have spies and thugs, with treasure hunters rounding out the whole group. So each of these really do kind of takes in the essence of the various archetypes that you can play in the core Symbaroum rules, and then transfers it over to 5e and keeping that same feel, but maintaining like the in the 5e version, we use them as archetypes, where in Symbaroum they're more as a role-playing guide, and guidance on, hey, you want to take these abilities if you want to kind of feel, if you want to be the most bestest of say being treasure hunters or troll singers and whatnot. So where one game is more heavily on the role-playing side and as a guidance, in 5e it's more of a game mechanic and a guidance. Then we got warriors. Warriors are a little bit, like I said, being fighters and barbarians. We have berserkers, duelists, runesmiths, knights, tattooed fighters, templars, which are pretty gosh darn close to being paladins. Weapon masters, you got a goblin there as a weapon master, and the Wrathguard. Wrathguard are barbarians, and they're from the barbarian tribes, and they are absolutely amazing in combat. So we got a whole variety of feats. We've got boons, which are like normal feats. We've got burdens. Burdens are feats, but they come with a detriment. So you're usually getting your full ability bonus that you would if you chose a feat, but you're getting a detriment alongside of that. And then there's origin feats that you have to be, say, to have shadow sight, you have to be an abducted human. There's class feats that are, like I said, well, that actually says it itself, that these are specific to, say, like a captain can only get command expert, or mystics can get confessor, that sort of thing. Now, resources, this is your basic layout of weapons and armor. Everything is put into a D&D format, so it'll be easier for those of you that are 5e players to recognize. So that's really nothing new, except that they really lay things out in a lot more detail than the standard player's handbook. We also get lifestyle expenses, which you normally don't see, trade goods, and a chemical elixir. So these are basically your potions, but they can be bought on the market. Lesser artifacts are magic items of an extent, but they don't cause permanent corruption when you attune to the items, and you do have to attune to them. And these you can actually just outright buy. We have traps, and then we get our spells. So a lot of the spells did transfer over 1-for-1 in this book, but they've added in typical 5e fashion spells from the regular player's handbook. So keep in mind, I would highly recommend that you only stick to the spells here. Do not bring any spells over from Dungeons and Dragons 5e, the main player's handbook, unless the DM authorizes, because it does tend to dilute or ruin the experience. There's a reason why not every spell is available. Now, some of the spells that are in here are directly brought over from that 5e because they do fit the setting, and they do kind of take the place of some other spells, but they have been modified for 5e. So keep that in mind. All right, so I can hear a couple people asking, how do you cure corruption? Well, corruption is difficult to cure. That's why you don't want it. There are 2 spells in the book. One's a 6th level spell, one's a 7th level spell that can remove a little bit of permanent corruption. Then there is an artifact called Dusk, or Water of Dusk, that a few drops can, one drop can cure 1 point of permanent corruption. That can found either, you can very rarely find pools of Water of Dusk, and it's only going to have a finite amount, or you're going to find some magic items, an artifact called Water of Dusk. And so Even when you get to those spells, they are not very forgiving. So they do usually have something, an extra rule or something attached. So it's not just, oh, hurry up and cast cure permanent corruption and just remove it. No, 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 no. One, you require to meet certain requirements. Basically, like, hey, if we're going to do this for this to happen, you've got to atone, and you've got to go on a quest to do this, or maybe you need to donate this. There's always some sort of requirement for that spell. And the other one is basically transferring it to a soul stone that somebody else is going to have and end up getting corruption. So it is not a good idea to get corruption, guys and gals. Just as a fair warning. So right now, the Runes of Symbaroum 5e is available for pre-order. As I mentioned, I'll have that link down below. I want to we'll get more into it when we get to the lore video, but I want to show you guys the scope of what you are dealing with here. Let me get the right map up. So here, let's go with this one. There we go. So this is basically on the right-hand side, the size of the main Symbaroum play area on the right-hand side of your screen. The arrow is kind of, I'm not going to say it's the starting city, but it's kind of like the city of adventurers called Thistlehold. We'll take a look just so you can get to see this, the scale of this. But that is the Davokor forest. That is the deep, dark, nasty, dangerous forest that most of the time you're going to find yourself in. On the left hand, that is a map of the main continent that you are playing on, and that's kind of overlapping the United States. So you can see that it is a small continent. It can fit within inside the United States, but you can see how big Davokor is, taking up Wyoming, Montana, half of Idaho, and parts of, I mean, it's a massive forest, guys and gals. And once again, that arrow is marking where the starting, I don't want to say starting city. I hate saying starting city, but it's the starting city. Thistlehold. Here's another close up so you can see how big your play area is with ruins of the Symbaroum kingdom that has been centuries, millennia lost. And not only do you have the forest to deal with, you have all the surrounding cities going on with stuff going on in there. So if you want to do a city campaign, you are well equipped to deal with that. If you want to delve into both, you're good. You have the Yonder world, which is basically the underworld. No, the underworld is the underworld. Then you have the Yonder world, which is the spirit world, which is in itself an entirely crazy thing to deal with. So there is a lot to do in Symbaroum. It is a very dark, grim, gritty, difficult setting to play in. So if you want to challenge your players or challenge yourself as a role player and as a dice role player, as a GM, then I highly recommend the Runes of Symbaroum 5e. This is just the player's handbook, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be looking at the Game Master's Guide probably tomorrow, and then the bestiary on Friday. And then we'll do probably a series of lore videos because there's a lot of lore to cover, and I'm going to try to condense it down. Anyways, my name is John. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think. Have you played Symbaroum before? Are you looking forward to Runes of Symbaroum? What do you think of what I've talked about and I covered here in the book? Is there something else you want me to hint on in the next video, or maybe a compilation video later on, something I didn't cover? Just let me know in the comments below. I super appreciate it. You guys have yourself a wonderful day. See ya.